And joining me now live for more on this is the CEO of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Andrew McKellar. Andrew, good morning. Thanks for joining us. Is this delay an admission that it's a flawed policy to begin with?
Well, good to be with you, Danica. Absolutely. I think our concern is it's complex legislation. It's not good for business. It's going to make it harder for businesses to employ people. So whether that's in labour hire, whether that's in casual employment, whether you are an innovative new gig platform looking for workers, it's going to make it harder. It's going to add to costs. So I think every day, as we hear more from the government about the changes that it's going to make, it gets more confusing. So very clearly, and the fact that they have to exempt small businesses, that's a sign that it's bad for all business. So I think here really, we think the government should rethink this legislation. We will urge the Senate to look very carefully at it, and ultimately, we think the Senate should reject this legislation.
What's the middle ground, though? What does striking a balance look like to business?
Well, I think there's got to be a lot more concessions from the government, and really they haven't made the case. You know, if this was going to be worthwhile legislation, then there would be an agenda here to say, how do we make it easier to employ people? How do we make it easier to get productivity rises going again? Because that's the only thing that's going to lead to sustainable wage increases that are going to end up outstripping inflation, delivering higher living standards across the board. Now, there's nothing in this legislation that offers that prospect. So in those terms, really the government should be going back to the drawing board.
The government's been really talking about the gig economy. Do you accept that IR needs to be modernised to protect gig economy workers?
Well, look, I think here in areas like ride share, food delivery, the major providers in that area have said they are quite open to workable standards that address pay, that address issues of insurance and record keeping. But the government is going much further than that. They're really trying to tie some of these platforms in knots, and there's no consistency. So in the last couple of days, we've heard Tony Burke saying, oh, a platform like Airtasker, they're out. They're not going to be affected by these new arrangements. But another one in the care sector like Mabel, they're going to be roped in. Now, there's absolutely no explanation as to why that difference is there. In some cases, they're offering the same types of jobs on these platforms, and in some cases, the same people are registered on both platforms. So why one is in and one is out, nobody can understand what is going through the government's mind on this sort of arrangement.
No, it's a tricky one. How do you ensure, I guess, that the system doesn't become really rigid?
Well, I think the government can't guarantee that, and this is the whole thing. So, you know, these platforms, make a living because they're agile, they're innovative, they're using technology, they're bringing people who have a service that they want to provide to people who have a demand for that service. They're establishing a marketplace, they're meeting a demand. If you make it more expensive at a time when cost of living is going up, it's going to mean that it's harder to afford and honestly harder to employ people in those sorts of roles. So it seems to be completely self-defeating.
Just before we let you go, the fact the government has said that small businesses overall are now exempt, does it suggest to you that the government has offered an olive branch and is indeed willing to negotiate? Does that ease some of your concerns?
Well, I think what it clearly demonstrates is it's bad for business. I mean, if it's bad for small business, it's bad for medium-sized business. If it's bad for medium-sized business, it's bad for bigger businesses. So, I mean, where do you draw the line? An arbitrary line at 20 employees or 25 employees doesn't make it good for people with 30 employees or 50 employees. So this is bad legislation. It's flawed legislation. The government hasn't made the case. They should really go back to the drawing board.
Andrew McKellar, no doubt we'll find out more about this today. Thank you so much for joining us this morning on the program.